your host, Jill Cody, and today I have a great pleasure of welcoming back my former co-host, Dr. Pettis Perry. Welcome back, Pettis. I'm so glad you could join me for this program.
Hey, Jill, it's so good to hear your voice. Thanks for inviting me. I think that this is going to be a great conversation, and I really can't wait to get started.
Oh, I'm so glad, too. What have you been doing since the last time you were on the show? Get us caught up a little bit.
Well, I've become a grandfather as one part of that. I'm really excited about that. Yeah, it may change life and have me coming back to California if things work out the way I'd like. And I'm teaching other places and working on my consulting business, and I'm in the process of writing a book on trauma and toxicity in the workplace. So there have been some life changes, but I'm really happy about them, and I get a chance now to be a little bit more creative myself.
Well, Pettis, I'd like to introduce you for those of who have not or new to the program. You have been on Be Bold America as a co-host and interview guest for several years, and you professionally are the principal consultant with Perry Organizational Effectiveness, LLC, a Bellingham, Washington consulting firm, and you hold an adjunct professorship in Transformative Leadership program at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. And then I just wanted to congratulate you for being a grandfather for the first time.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that, Jill. It's a great honor to make it long to have a grandchild.
Now, our program today is Pirates of the Slave Trade, the Birth of an American Institution. No one present at the Battle of Cape Lopez off the coast of West Africa in 1722 could have known that they were on the edge of history. This obscure yet fierce naval battle would have a monumental impact on British colonies and the future of slavery in America. Today, we have the honor to speak with historian Dr. Angela Sutton from Vanderbilt University. Dr. Sutton's extensive research outlines the complex network of trade routes spanning the Atlantic Ocean that was trafficked by agents of empire, private merchants, and brutal pirates alike. Drawing from a wide range of primary historical sources, Dr. Sutton offers a new perspective on how a single battle that played a pivotal role in reshaping the trade of enslaved people in ways that affect America to this day. We have big things to do. Pettis, would you like to introduce our guest?
I certainly would. Dr. Angela C. Sutton is an assistant research professor at Vanderbilt University, where she has taught sea power in history, the golden age of piracy, and comparative slavery. Dr. Sutton is author of the new book, Pirates of the Slave Trade, The Battle of Cape Lopez and the Birth of an American Institution, that we'll be discussing today. She is the director of Builders and Defenders. This significant project encompasses a comprehensive database documenting the enslaved and free black laborers and soldiers who were integral in constructing and defending Fort Negley, a pivotal Civil War fortification in Nashville, now part of the UNESCO routes of enslaved people. She also provides oversight to the Oral History Archive, a key component of the Fort Negley Descendants Project, which captures the narratives of their descendants. Welcome to Be Bold America, Dr. Sutton.
Thank you. What an introduction. It's so great to be here.
Jill?
Yes.
Back to you.
Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Sutton. How are you today?
Thank you. No, I'm so great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to this interview. Dr. Sutton, why should every American know about the Battle of Cape Lopez, and why do so few do?
Oh, it's a great question. I think that when you look at the Battle of Cape Lopez, right, it happens in 1722 off the coast of Gabon in West Africa, and it is between a band of pirates that had been wreaking havoc on the slave trade, just attacking every slave ship, every factory where enslaved people were being kept imprisoned until they were ready to be put onto ships. Every port that they could find, they exploded them. They killed. They took crews. They impressed people into their fleet. And it was between them and the British Navy, who was, of course, attempting to stop them because they had brought the slave trade to a standstill. And the demand of the Americas had grown so exponentially that the British had no choice in their eyes, right, but to send out some of their best ships to stop this pirate menace. And what happens at this battle is that, of course, the pirates do get brutally killed and taken away, and then most of them are executed or have other terrible things happen to them. But what it does is it creates a situation where Britain becomes the preeminent slave trading power. See, before that, the Dutch were right up there, the Portuguese, the French. There was this battle for who would have supremacy in the trade. After the Battle of Cape Lopez, it's a very decisive turn, and Britain becomes the number one enslaving power. And they're the ones that are responsible for bringing their form of slavery, which is chattel slavery, to North America, to the territories that would become the United States. And so prior to this point, you have a wide variety of different interpretations of what slavery could be. And a lot of the other European powers who are enslaving Africans and forcing them to work in the Americas are using the Roman model. That's their understanding of enslavement. And so under the Roman model, people still have human rights. It's a limited set, of course, and you're still enslaved, and you still have to, your labor is still taken from you. However, you still get to have the right to be a human being who gets to have the right to life and the right to familial integrity. Your children cannot be taken from you under the Roman model. It does happen, of course, it did happen, but legally, enslaved people had recourse if they knew how to navigate the system. Under the chattel model, enslaved people become objects in the eyes of the law. So they go from being people to being legally things, and things can be treated however you treat things. And that is the whole root of every problem that we've run into, I think, in this country ever since. The fact that we were fine with taking the humanity away of one group of people. Once you do that, it leaves the door open to take anyone else's humanity away, too.
And chattel slavery was just really brutal and dehumanizing. And,
in every way.
And the opposite of the Roman model.
Well, it was not the opposite, but
not the
certainly,
opposite. Okay.
Under both models, you were still enslaved. And you still
right.
had to give all of your labor to the person who claimed to own you. But under the Roman model, once you were done, you were done. You could come in and out of slavery. You could buy yourself free, and your children would be guaranteed to be free because you couldn't enslave someone's children. Under the chattel model, everything, every descendant that you ever produce still belongs to the descendants of the people who enslaved you. So it's like this permanent state of objectification that is just so all-encompassingly evil.
Pettis?
Dr. Sutton, first of all, thank you for writing this book. I hope someday that it becomes a movie. I think it's a great story that I think can be told and really change our understanding of what happened with slavery. Now, my family was a family of historians, and as I looked at history from the West looking east. But your book talks about slavery and the industry looking from the east towards the west, and it's a very important untold part of the story. So, thank you very much for writing this book. It has certainly given me additional insight into an era that I have a great deal of interest in. And we kind of got to the end before I was ready to get there. But let me kind of get you to continue your discussion about chattel slavery and the taking away of any thought of personhood and its connection to some of the behaviors that we're seeing today. If you could talk a little bit more about the construction of race as it pertains to the evolution of the trafficking trade and into what we are now still fighting against. One of the things that we talk about is the never answering the race question, and you get to it.
Yeah.
So could you talk just a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to first of all, thank you for those comments. Secondly, I want to say that there are historians who have done this so much better than me, so I'm going to tell you their names so you can read them. So first of all, Jennifer Morgan, go and just read everything that she's ever written, because she really has such a clear and cogent argument about how chattel slavery specifically creates this imagination of race in the U.S., and how that imagination of race is what essentially becomes the backbone upon which everything else is sort of hanged in this country, right? And there's a historian, Ira Berlin, who writes about the difference between a society with slaves versus a slave society. And a society with slaves is like the Roman society, in which you have a society and enslaved people are part of your society. A slave society, on the other hand, is like the U.S., it's like Brazil, it's like a lot of the other places in the Americas, where every single part of that society depends upon the enslavement of a group of dehumanized others. That means that our culture, our economics, our religion, or even our language, it all comes down to this bifurcation between people who are white and who are free and people who are black and who are not. And so what you really see at this point, during the Battle of Cape Lopez, the 1720s, is when you begin to have this calcification of this understanding that only people with visibly dark skin can be enslaved and can be rendered legally objects, can be objectified in the law, and can be held in that way permanently. That sort of becomes this new idea that empires are pushing, because it dovetails nicely with the development of capitalism. And capitalism, of course, as we know, depends upon the undervaluing and the stealing of labor from others. And there's no harsher and more economically efficient way to steal labor from others than to permanently enslave them and their descendants.
Yeah, just one quick thing. One of the points that you make very poignantly in your book is you talk a lot about the state sponsorship of human trafficking, which had been going on, if I remember the numbers, 100 years with the Dutch and others involved before the Brits got in. Can you talk a little bit more about what you were just discussing about the shift and how we got to the shift?
Yeah, sure. I think that there's so much that we as Americans don't get to know about how things went down in West Africa. And when you read the narratives of enslavers, right, that, most of my documentary base is all written by enslavers. I have very little written by anyone else. And that certainly changes the way you look at the history, because you only see enslavers putting themselves into the most favorable light. And even in the most favorable light, it's nothing but gruesome cruelty as they try to find and invent every possible way that they can leverage their ships, their ammunition, their ability to build fortifications along the West African coast, their language skills, anything they can think of in order to extract more human beings out of Africa. And a lot of that involves creating a society or creating a culture in West Africa where essentially your only options, if you are West African, your only options are to join the Europeans and help them find enslaved captives to sell, or run away from the Europeans and try to go into the interior, but then subject yourself to being hunted down. And so there becomes a society in which nobody is able to escape the horribleness of the trade. Your choice is either to join it or to fight it. And in fighting it, there's a very big chance that you and your loved ones could end up on ships and could never return. And so these companies, what they did is they essentially consolidated all of their money, they consolidated all of their political power, and they were able to build ships at record speed and ensure that there was always enough on their ships to trade with when they came into West Africa. And it was the Portuguese sort of began this, and then very quickly the Spanish followed, and then the Swedish came in. And then after that, we have the Dutch, who were able to do much, much more because they'd always been a merchant society, right? The Dutch had, who's calling? I'm sorry, are you there?
Yes, we're here.
Oh, sorry. I think someone from your office is calling me, but okay. Sorry, we're still here, so I'll just ignore that.
Yes, we're still here. My engineer's looking very puzzled. But it's live radio, so go right ahead, Dr. Sutton, and then it's time for a break. Finish your thought.
Sure. Yeah, and so when you have the way that these companies kind of come in one after the other, they keep trying to outdo each other. And the way that they outdo each other is by finding the most powerful and the most militarily powerful Africans to ally with and to coerce into the trade. And I think that is sort of how you get this almost like a lot of these fortresses end up being called factories. Before the Industrial Revolution, the word factories is being used because in a way they're churning out these enslaved bodies at record numbers in order to load onto ships and bring over to the Americas.
You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7, 89.5, 89.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the ksqd.org website. Our topic today is Pirates of the Slave Trade, the birth of an American institution. And we, Dr. Pettis and I, are speaking with Dr. Angela Sutton, Assistant Research Professor at Vanderbilt University and author of the new book, Pirates of the Slave Trade, The Battle of Cape Lopez, and the Birth of an American Institution. You may reach Dr. Sutton at Vanderbilt University or at x.com, Dr. Angela Sutton, and that's Dr. with no period, Angela Sutton. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, your host for Progressive Talk on K-Squid, 90.7 FM, community radio for the Central Coast, 4 p.m. weekdays. KSQD is a vital media resource for listeners in Santa Cruz and Monterey counties and worldwide on the web. Please help support this station by making a contribution to keep the station thriving. Go to ksqd.org and give what you can to help keep shows like mine coming to you daily at 90.7 FM. You know, with 6 large corporations owning most of the media, it's essential that listeners support grassroots, locally run radio stations like KSQD. Community radio is responsive to its listeners and isn't afraid to challenge the status quo. Please join me, Tom Hartman, in supporting K-Squid, 90.7 FM, community radio for the Central Coast by making your pledge today online at ksqd.org. That's 90.7 FM, K-Squid. Catch me right here at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you, and tag you're it.
Now, Dr. Sutton, I wanted to get back to the Battle of Cape Lopez. It seems to be the tipping point, and you talk about it being an obscure and fierce naval battle with monumental impact on the future of slavery in America. So, tell us a little bit about that battle and why it had such an impact. And was Black Bart part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Black Bart, he was such an interesting character because he's essentially the everyman. What you have to know about this time period, so 1722, by this time, 1 in 3 slave ships are being attacked by pirates. And so people who were working on slave ships knew very well that there was a high chance that they wouldn't make it back. And Black Bart was a navigator on that ship. And like most people who worked in the trade, except for the captains, of course, they were sort of coerced into it. Either they were physically impressed by people or it was circumstance that coerced them, right? Like there was a crazy amount of inflation happening because of all of the wealth extracted out of the New World being concentrated in the hands of the few of the royal companies. And so a lot of the fishermen and things like that, they were out of work and they were forced onto these ships by circumstance. And it was an incredibly miserable job. I mean, of course, being enslaved was the worst, but working on a slave ship was also pretty horrific. And being forced to keep enslaved people pacified, otherwise your chances of being thrown overboard were quite high as well. And so he was working as a navigator on a slave ship. And when the pirates come to get his ship, he's the first one to volunteer to join the pirates. Like he's ready to get off that ship. And most of the people he served with also joined the pirates. And shortly after that, his captain dies in a very elaborate, interesting con that he tries to pull from the governor of Principe, and the Portuguese governor. And so Black Bart gets elevated to captain within 3 months of becoming a pirate. And because he's a little bit older and a little bit wiser than a lot of the other men, generally it was very young people who got forced into this trade. So, think 17, 18, 19 years old. Black Bart was in his 30s. And so he leads this big pirate troop, and he realizes that there's nowhere left to go. The pirates would have gone to the Caribbean, but at this time, all the naval powers were cracking down on piracy in the Caribbean, pushing all of the pirates into Africa. And so there was this like nihilistic rush near the end of what we call the golden age of piracy for pirates to hurry up and grab as much wealth as they could so that they could trade up to a big enough ship that would be stable enough to make it round South Africa and into the East Indies, where it was a lot easier to be a pirate. There were a lot more things to plunder and a lot more places to hide in the East Indies and the Pacific. But getting there was a major problem. And so a lot of the pirate fleets, they realized that they banded together. So many captains banded together with all of their ships. They could sail in a fleet and essentially beat anybody that tried to get them. And so Black Bart, for a year and a half, he was just like creating havoc all along West Africa's coast, while Challoner Ogle, who's like this naval officer who's tasked with hunting him down, is right in front of him the entire time. So Ogle thinks he's pursuing Bart, but Bart and all of his pirates are behind him for almost a year and a half. Ogle never thinks to look in his rear view. Yeah. And so at some point, it's an incredible amount of luck that they finally do cross paths when Black Bart's crew had just had an incredible shake-up, incredible dust-up, and they're taking a break in the Gabon estuary because it's a great place to get your ships up on land and scrape the barnacles off and get them refitted and things. Black Bart had this penchant for taking all the best bits out of all the ships and cobbling them together into like super floating fortresses. So he liked to have like the biggest weapons, and he would like lash them together and just make a floating fortress. And so they were doing this when Challoner Ogle found them. And Challoner Ogle was quite clever in that he disguised his ship to look like a merchant ship. He put up the Portuguese flag to make them think that it was just an undefensible Portuguese ship. And he comes out into the middle of nowhere where the pirates can't run and pretends to be distressed. And so the pirates investigate because they're going to take his ship. And then at the last minute, he raises the British flag. And that, as soon as you raise the British flag, you're telling the pirates, if you fire on me, you're dead. Like, it's an immediate death sentence. And so the pirates, they got quite scared, and they debated among themselves whether they should or not, until, of course, some of the more arrogant long-timers who were a little bit more nihilistic in their outlook decided to make the decision for the whole crew and engage. And from there, you just have this like monumental clash that comes in two different waves because there's two different arenas of battle there. And when Challoner Ogle wins, he takes the rest of the survivors up to Cape Coast Castle, which is the seat of English Royal Africa Trading Company. And so at Cape Coast Castle, which is still there, you can go visit it, all the pirates go into the slave dungeons, and they're left kind of to their own devices as a lot of them die from their wounds and things until they get tried, and then they get subject to this like mock trial. And the mock trial was so interesting because even at this stage, Black Bart had a lot of black pirates in his crew. And Challoner Ogle could have tried the black pirates too and hung them, but instead he decided to separate out anybody who looked visibly black and sell them into the trade without asking them to give any testimony. And there's so much precedent for that because 2 or 3 years prior, Blackbeard, his crew, also got taken by Governor Spotswood in Virginia, and he had many black pirates on board as well. And one black pirate ends up being asked to give testimony in the court trial, and later the governor goes back and erases the testimony because he decides that as a black person, he is a thing and not a person, and things cannot give testimony. And so Challoner Ogle, and so Challoner Ogle takes another leaf out of that book and does the exact same thing. He figures if you're black, you're a thing and you can be sold, and he sells them and pockets that money, never even shares it, never even skips a beat. Like, it's an immediate decision for him. And I think that's where you can sort of see that agents of empire had such a high stake in objectifying black people because that is where all of their finances came from. That is how they built their empire, off of the blood and sweat and off the backs of Africans.
And was that the root of how the chattel slavery began that then became our model?
Yeah, right, because after that battle, the slave trade calmed down. The assault on the slave trade calmed down, and the British were able to rebuild the fastest. And so they were able to ship enslaved Africans out at greater amounts than anybody else. And they brought them to their colonies, which, of course, were the North American territories, the ones that would become our country, as well as some British Caribbean islands. And so because the British were able to have this swell, this influx of enslaved people that they brought here, they were able to influence the type of culture that they would bring. And so chattel slavery sort of starts to take root at this time in what would become the United States.
Pettis, I can just feel it. You have a question.
Just one?
Just one. You could have a couple.
Would you talk a little bit about another one of the characters in your book? I believe you pronounce his name John Connie, and his role. One of the things that happens when we have conversations around the trade is the discussion about Africans selling Africans into slavery. Could you talk a little bit about the motivation for that and how that came about and what Connie's role was?
Yes. I so appreciate this question because every year I get someone, right? It's either on social media or it's in a class or when I'm giving a talk. Someone thinks they have outsmarted the professor, and someone thinks that they have found a way to allow their bigotries to persist comfortably in their minds. And they go, well, didn't they sell their own? As if that makes everything okay, everything I've said, as if it makes it fine. And I just want to clarify that people in Africa who were involved in the slave trade did not have a choice. Their choices were to participate in the trade and have European allies, or be without European allies and be targeted for elimination. And so John Connie did what was best for his people. Didn't make him a good person, of course. Nobody's a good person in my book. There are no heroes in my book. But John Connie was someone who also had just an incredible life. And he is the most fascinating character in the book. So he is an Ahantan prince, and he grows up at just the right time. So when he's a small child, his people end up dealing with the Swedish Africa Company that comes in, and they get burned really badly. And John Connie witnesses this as a child. And then shortly after, the Dutch come in and try to make a deal with his people as well. And John Connie's a teenager at that time, and he sees what the Dutch do. And there is some conflict between some of the leaders in John Connie's group and the Dutch slave traders. And so the Dutch slave traders go back and they bring back a bunch of cannons and they lay waste to Connie's village. And so Connie manages to escape with his family. They shift him up north to be safe. And while he's up north, he trains with the Fanti and learns how to fight in every possible way that he can, because the Fanti have long experience with Europeans, and they realize that they're going to need every ounce of martial power if they're going to resist. And then when John Connie returns, for the Dutch again. They try to make a deal with him again. He's like, no way, I refuse to make a deal with the Dutch. They're my worst enemies. And so then the Prussians come in, and John Connie entertains them. He sits them down. He's like, what do you want? He already knows. He already knows what they want because he's already dealt with the Swedes and with the Dutch. And he already has some English people sniffing around too. Like, everybody wants the place where Connie's family lives on Manfro Hill in Pokesu, what is now modern Princess Town in Ghana. Everyone wants it because it is strategic, very geographically strategic place. Everyone's got to stop there to get water for their ships. Whoever owns that spot has access to the information of everybody who's in the slave trade. So it's an incredibly advantageous space, and John Connie knows this. So by the time he's in his 50s, he has made a relationship with the Prussians under the condition that they let him lead. And so he's the one who tells them how it's going to be. He's the one that determines how the trade is going to work. And the Prussian letters are so interesting because it's really just Prussian slave traders writing back, trying to convince their governor that Connie is right. They keep saying, we should listen to Connie. Connie is right. Connie knows what he's doing. And the underlying assumption or the underlying understanding, of course, is that if they do not listen to Connie, Connie is going to have them destroyed. So there's like this constant, the slave traders are feeling very unsafe with him, and they are trying really hard to help their employer to see that they're only there by the grace of John Connie. So it's kind of a different and interesting relationship. And so John Connie ends up, when the Prussians decide that they've had enough of this, they leave and they sell their castle to the Dutch, and the Dutch come to claim it, and John Connie's like, oh, no, this is on my land, and you stop paying rent, and so it's my castle now. And they have a big battle, and John Connie wins, and he beheads the Dutchmen and takes their skulls and turns them into punch bowls, because it is the way that he menaces any other European that comes to try to deal with him. So he brings out this set of punch bowls made out of Dutchmen's skulls, and he has people have a drink, and he's got them all tipped in gold. John Connie is sitting on a gold mine, so everyone is dressed in gold. The Dutchmen's skulls are flaked in gold, and he hands them out to his European visitors, to his pirate visitors, to anybody who is going to come and try to start anything at his castle. And so by the time the Battle of Cape Lopez comes around, Connie is well into his 60s. He's wise, he knows everything, he's seen it all, and he knows the pirates and he knows the naval officers, and he's been giving them both intel. He's been feeding them both information and taking their information and selling it to the highest bidder as well. And so he sort of has been stirring it. And after the Battle of Cape Lopez, what happens is that the English are able to have a much better slave trade, and the Dutch become incredibly worried because their only slave trade is being blocked by John Connie, who's refusing to let them in. And so they realize that they have a similar problem. Like, they need to destroy John Connie, just like the English needed to destroy Black Bart and the pirate fleet. Otherwise, the Dutch are going to flounder and they're going to fail in their trade while the English take over. And so John Connie then becomes a target for elimination, and the Dutch and the English actually team up to try to get rid of him. But he doesn't go easy. He doesn't go down easy at all.
And one reason they want to target him is that he decorated his home with bones of Dutch soldiers.
Yeah.
You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7, 89.5, 89.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the KSQD.org website. Our topic today is Pirates of the Slave Trade, the birth of an American institution. And we are speaking with our bold guest, Dr. Angela Sutton, on her new book that explains the importance of a fierce naval battle at Cape Lopez in 1722 that impacted slavery today. We will be right back after Jim Hightower's commentary titled, The Humanities Humanize Our Society. So kill 'em, say right-wingers.
The far-out right wing's latest political ploy takes extremism to the extreme, escalating their divisive series of culture wars, banning books, suppressing women's rights, whitewashing history, demonizing teachers, etc. Their current idea is to declare war on ideas. Specifically, they're going after state university programs that teach creative arts and social studies, including history, languages, music, civics, literature, economics, theology, and other courses in the humanities that explore ideas, foster free thinking, and expand enlightenment. They say we can't have that. Thus, GOP lawmakers in North Carolina, for example, are eliminating funding for top humanities professors in their universities, shifting those funds to programs in high-tech and engineering that are favored by the corporate hierarchy. Likewise, public universities in Alaska, Florida, Iowa, Kansas, Ohio, and elsewhere are being made to cancel their humanities programs and puff up their departments of business, finance, and marketing. The right-wing shriveled view is that a university education is not about expanding one's horizon and enriching America's democratic society, but solely about training students to fit into a corporate workforce. As a Mississippi Republican official explained, under this minimalized and monetized concept of higher education, state spending on college degree programs will require that they match the needs of the economy. What? Is America nothing but its economy? Is the value of students measured only by the size of their future paychecks? Is public spending only worthy if it serves corporate interests? This is Jim Hightower saying, ironically, the politicos trying to cancel teaching of the humanities are proving that such courses are essential. After all, the humanities strive to humanize today's social order of corporate domination, exploitation, and inequality. The value of that vastly exceeds its price. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you subscribers to Jim Hightower's Lowdown on Substack. Find us at jimhightower.substack.com.
If you're just joining us, our topic today is Pirates of the Slave Trade, the birth of an American institution. And our guest is Dr. Angela Sutton, who is an assistant research professor at Vanderbilt University. And I'm honored to have Dr. Pettis Perry back as co-host today. Dr. Sutton, in the commentary that Jim Hightower mentioned, the right-wing whitewashing of history and declaring war on ideas by going after universities teaching creative arts and social studies, including history. After hearing Jim Hightower's commentary, did any thoughts or reactions come to mind?
Yeah, of course. You know, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm very fortunate to be at a private university that's got a nice endowment, and there's a lot of support in Nashville and in the state of Tennessee for incredibly robust humanities education. And I get to work with such wonderful people to put that into place. However, I'm one of the only lucky ones, right? Like there's so much injustice that happens at the state level. So much injustice here with Tennessee State University, for example. They're owed over $2 billion by the Tennessee government. Tennessee government has neglected Tennessee State University, which is our largest public HBCU, in favor of UT and its other universities. And so I can see that gutting happening every day. And then, of course, at the public school, high school, and elementary school level, I live just 45 minutes north of Franklin, Tennessee, where we've had such an incredible assault on the public school teachers who are trying to teach just the truth, just what happened, right? Like not even anything that should be controversial, where we've had right-wing activists come into the school board meetings, and they have pushed this idea that anything to do with race or anything to do with black people in the curriculum is somehow critical race theory, and that is not at all true. Like what I do is critical race theory. What teachers in high schools do is history.
Pettis, I know you have questions on our topic, but did you have any follow-up thoughts and reactions to Jim Hightower's commentary?
I'm always concerned with censorship. It's not what universities are about. They're supposed to be the one place in the world where you can go and debate ideas. And when you start eliminating what people can read, all you're doing is dumbing down a society. Because something makes one person uncomfortable doesn't mean it makes other people uncomfortable. And quite frankly, as a person of color, I've had to deal with this stuff my whole life. And it would be good to be able to have a conversation in the open without fear of anybody getting hurt about the kinds of things that discrimination, racism, white supremacy do to the psyche of people. I'm very involved now in trying to create trauma-informed communities. And as I look at the work of what Dr. Sutton has put together, it is explaining exactly why we're having the issues we are. And Jill, if you remember, we had Regina Mason on, whose great-great-great-grandfather, William Grimes, wrote his story about being enslaved, which came in 1820. So it's right in this same time period, showing what happens to people who are enslaved. It's the most dehumanizing thing that I could think of when you start talking about trafficking people. So this is something we're now confronting our history, and the question is going to be, what do we do with it? Do we deal with it honestly and resolve the issues between us so we can move on? Or are we going to allow these things to continue to divide us and to make us enemies of each other? And I hope it's the former.
Now, Dr. Sutton, that's a book that I wanted to suggest to you that you probably aren't aware of, which is The Life and Times of William Grimes. I know that Frederick Douglass was and is a great, considered a great author and historical figure and one of the first people to write about slavery. But this book by Regina, what was Regina's last name?
William Grimes.
Well, no, Regina Mason.
Well,
the author was Regina Mason, and of The Life and Times of William Grimes. But he actually was a slave at the time, wrote himself, with the help of a white woman, his memoir of being a slave, and it is just powerful and sickening, and then he wrote a second memoir when he got older to finish the story, and Regina Mason put it all together. So not to take too much more time, but I recommend that book for anyone. And also you wrote, Dr. Sutton, The Value of Reading History. There is a value of reading history with an anti-racist lens. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So for me, it's the realization that, systems of white supremacy have been so entrenched for so long. And when I look at the work that I'm doing, especially with this book, right, like all of my documents come from the 1700s, and all of the documents were written by white enslavers. Every single piece that I have, that I use, was written by white enslavers. And the reason for that is because what Africans and their descendants, enslaved or free, had to write and say was not deemed important enough by the people who were given money to preserve those documents and make them available to people like me. And so when I go in and do this work, I realize that I'm only getting a very small part of the story. And so instead of, in addition to reading the documents of all of these enslavers and kind of triangulating them to see what we can find out about the Africans they're talking about in their documents, I also use a lot of geography. I use a lot of archaeological evidence. I use a lot of oral histories and a lot of modern stories from Africa and African Americans to get a sense of the landscape and the understandings that passed between and among Africans at this time period. I think it's the only way to do history and to and it means also to acknowledge all of the power structures that not only created the data sources that I use, but that also inform everything about how the book is written, right? I had to think about the ways in which these books are shelved when you're going in a bookstore and you're searching for my book, where would it be shelved? And the shelf that I would prefer to have it on maybe isn't a shelf that exists, and so you have to make a decision. So many times when I'm introduced, people introduce me as an African American historian, and it's just not true. I don't think that I do African American history. I don't think I'm qualified. I think that I'm doing history, and history just so happens to be very black. It's just that we have had so much of the blackness stripped from our history to make it more palatable to the victors of history, and I'm trying hard to put it back in. But I'm writing U.S. history. I'm writing Atlantic world history. I don't think this is only black history. I think this is our shared history, and we all need to know it.
Well said. Pettis?
Yeah, I think if it's called black history, it diminishes what it really represents myself. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I would like to kind of shift a little bit, talk a little bit about the Constitution and Article 1, Section 9, that allowed slavery to continue for 20 years after the Constitution was adopted. So about 1808, it was shut down, at least legally. I'd like to get your opinion as to whether it stopped or whether it took a different form, and then what that stopping of the importation of new labor did to the industry itself.
Oh, yeah. Of course, slavery has never ended in this country, and it's such an important thing to say, and to say often. After slavery was made illegal in this country, of course, it took many other forms. And in our country, prisons were the main way, right? People were incarcerated, and then their labor was exploited in that way. But it's so interesting when you think about this comparatively, because other countries had other ways of extending slavery beyond its legality. So, for example, in Brazil and in the Bahamas, they have this tutelage system, or this mentorship, almost, they call it. It's not, of course, but it's where former enslavers can claim that the children that were enslaved under their care should remain with them until they turn 18, so that the former enslavers can train them how to be good citizens, how to be good, diligent workers. But of course, that's not what happened, right? There wasn't any mentorship. It was just a way to steal their labor until they turned 18. And Brazilian court cases are absolutely full of formerly enslaved women trying to sue their former enslavers for the custody of their children back, because they know that their children are not getting mentorship and skills from their former enslavers. Their children are being exploited because they're under 18 and because the law has provided a way for slavery to legally continue. And so I just wanted to impress that, we are not alone in this country with this history. We are part of a huge Atlantic global system in which the entire world depended on the free labor of Africans and their descendants. And then after it was made illegal for many different reasons, there continued to be theft of African labor and personhood way beyond the time that was marked. And we continue to do so today in prisons. They're still overwhelmingly filled with Black people, and they're overwhelmingly being underpaid for the labor that they are performing in those prisons. So it's something that never really ended. It just took another form, as you said. However, like with the stopping of imports, something that I think a lot of Americans maybe don't know and would find really interesting to think about is that, we, in the U.S., we stopped bringing enslaved people in relatively early compared to other places. And so, for example, Cuba and Brazil, their slave trade extended far beyond ours. And Britain was even trying to, at that point, police the waters to stop the trade from happening because they had decided that abolition was the way forward, right, after a big song and dance, right? And so when we in the U.S. stopped the legal imports of Africans, what we did was we created a society in which we nobody had to, in which enslavers decided that they had to maintain the population of enslaved people at any costs. And so you get into some of the most disgusting abuses of human beings in which they're treated like animals and are bred and are forced to breed in order to create a self-sustaining sort of population. And then, of course, you have...
We need to take a break. Dr. Pettis Perry and I are speaking with our Bold interview guest, Dr. Angela Sutton, and you are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7, 89.5, and 89.7 FM. Many voices, one station. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Tune in to the next episode of the Sunday Dinner on November 19th from 6 to 7 p.m. DJ Dupsy welcomes back local artist and activist Record to share some music from his current album as well as upcoming projects, and also talking about the importance of indigenous perspectives in music as well as the power of being a DIY recording artist. That's the Sunday Dinner on K-Squid 90.7 FM, many voices, one station.
And we're back. And Dr. Sutton, this is our time where I ask what we might be able to keep doing, stop doing, and start doing. But first, I wanted to let you finish your thought and then to see if Pettis had any other question, too. We have about 9 minutes left.
Yeah, sure. Just wanted to talk about the differences between having a self-sustaining population that relies on sexual violence in order to be perpetuated versus having an extension of the slave trade in which imported Africans are the full base of the enslaved labor, and kind of think through what that does. Dr. Pettis is speaking about trauma and being trauma-informed and kind of understanding what that means. I think that so much of American history and culture is built on the trauma of people that we've othered, and it's so important to always keep that in mind when we move forward in our lives.
Pettis?
Thank you for those explanations. Near the end of your book, you talk about reverse engineering the slave society. Would you talk to us a little bit about that, what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. In the book, one thing that becomes clear as you read, and hopefully should be clear by the end, is that the way that our world is now was consciously created by unscrupulous and greedy people who decided that it was okay because it was good for their bottom line. And they consciously created this world. They wrote, they advocated, they organized themselves, they lobbied in parliaments, right? They put so much effort in order to create a world that where white people were forced to go along with the system of enslavement that they had put into place, and where the enslavement of Africans would continue for centuries. And I think that when you look at the ways in which enslavers created the world, that can help you reverse engineer it. You can also figure out how can we unmake that. I think it's absolutely possible to unmake it, but it means that we all have to do something about it.
Pettis, any other questions before we go into Keep, Stop, Start?
No, I just wanted to say thank you again, Dr. Sutton. I found this book very powerful. It's touched a lot of buttons for me. And it's helped to round out my perspective. And I hope everybody that's been listening today found it as fascinating as I have. So thank you.
I sure have.
I deeply appreciate that.
Well, Dr. Sutton, in these last few minutes, I'd like to ask what ideas you have for us to keep doing, stop doing, and start doing regarding what we can do to educate others. Our future depends on it.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, so I think we need to keep insisting that we get the full story in schools, in our books, on TV, right? Like, keep asking for those things, demand those things, in fact, and don't stop demanding them. So keep doing that. What we're going to stop doing is giving away our power and our privilege out of guilt. Something I see a lot of white people especially doing is that they recognize the ways in which, I am white as well, we recognize the ways in which we have been privileged and the ways in which we have been put above and in front of other people, and it makes us feel ashamed in a certain type of way. And instead of feeling that shame and sitting in it and giving away your power, take your power and extend it to those who don't have it. We can all have power and privilege. And then start doing, I want you to start facing our past unflinchingly. You're not responsible for your ancestors, only for addressing the inequalities that they put into place.
Can you expand more on that? I know that with the discussions of reparations now, at least in San Francisco, it's been a large discussion. And a lot of people say, well, I don't want to pay for what happened back, 150, 200, 300, 400 years ago. So can you...
but you're not paying for it. You're not paying for what happened.
Of course not, but that's how they're framing it. So
right.
Talk more about that, how you're not paying for it.
Right. So it's not that we as white people are like paying for something. It's that we as white people have been given things unfairly our whole lives, and our families have been given things unfairly. And of course, there are poor whites. I understand that. I was once poor as well, relatively speaking, of course. And of course, like, not everything is fair, and of course, not all white people are happy. What we're saying is that through the slave trade and through the systems of white supremacy, things were stolen from black people. And we benefited from that in indirect and indirect ways. And that has created a debt. We have run up our credit card and the bill is due. All right? That's all it is. So it's time to pay back.
I'm also going to start asking authors that I speak with about thinking in terms of teaching key concepts in new ways. I've learned more and more that even college students, high school students, millennials, they're not reading the books. They're looking on Instagram. They're looking at TikTok. They're looking at I don't know what else. So I'm wondering, are there other ways that you can get your key concepts out to those audiences?
Yeah, so I took the approach, if you can't beat them, then join them.
Oh, good.
So I'm on TikTok and I'm on Instagram. I make all kinds of reels. I make all kinds of videos where I explain different concepts, or I do a very short reading from the book, or I pick out some really interesting kind of questions that people have and deconstruct those questions for them in little, 2-minute bites. And it's been really nice. It's been like a slow and steady sort of increase in interest from people on TikTok. And a lot of the people are very young, very beautiful, very queer, and very hungry for this knowledge. Mm-hmm. They just don't maybe have the capacity to sit down and read a full book because our lives are just full to bursting with everything else. And that's totally fine. Not everyone has to read a book. There are so many ways to learn and so many ways to teach. And I love teaching through TikTok and Instagram. And I'm on the same handle there. It's just at Dr. Angela Sutton, all one word, Dr. Angela Sutton. So if anyone wants to come find me, I would love that.
Do you have a website yet for the book?
Just angelasutton.info.
Now, we have a minute or two. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to close with?
I know. I think your questions were so beautiful, and so I guess the last thing I want to say is just to express gratitude for being allowed to speak about these things, being asked such incredibly wonderful and thought-provoking questions, being able to pull my book apart in ways that I hadn't really thought about it. That's so useful to me too. That's going to be amazing for when I'm writing my second book, and it's about here, Nashville, Black Civil War soldiers in Nashville, and how they essentially created our whole city.
Oh, my. Pettis, we have a minute left. Do you have any closing thoughts? My great co-host.
I happen to have gone to Franklin, and I had a chance to kind of immerse myself in the Battle of Franklin, which was a very fierce battle. I think there were more troops in that city than any other close quarters battle. You said that you live in that area. Is there this rich tradition of blacks coming into the area post-Civil War or during the Civil War?
Oh, yeah. So if you go to buildersanddefenders.org, that's the database I've been working on, and there we talk about the Battle of Nashville. It was the battle of the Civil War that had the largest African-American involvement out of any conflict. And black people from all over the eastern half of the United States came to Nashville to fight because they wanted to bring an end to this conflict and begin a new country experiment in freedom. And if you go onto buildersanddefenders.org, there's a mapping feature where you can see exactly where people come from. Dr. Lee Williams at TSU calls it the Ellis Island of the South because black people from everywhere came to Nashville to fight, and then they stayed here after the war.
I had no idea about that history. That is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's incredibly exciting. I really love working with Fort Negley and all of that history.
Dr. Angela Sutton, thank you for being our bold and impressive guest today. Thank you for an hour of your valuable time to be on Be Bold America. I know I learned a lot. You may reach Dr. Sutton at Vanderbilt University or at x.com, Dr. Angela Sutton. That's DR with no period after the abbreviation. Dr. Sutton, thank you very much for teaching us tonight.
No, thank you so much. Anytime. Hopefully we could talk again soon.
What's up next on Be Bold America? Please join us on Sunday, December 3rd for Dying for Capitalism, How Big Money Fuels Extinction. We are dying, literally, from capitalism, and if our species is to survive, we need a new abolitionist movement whose goal is to overturn capitalism and replace it with policies and politics that are designed to meet the needs of the many instead of the bottom lines of the few. A triangle of extinction, capitalism, environmental death, and war are creating an emergency that humanity as a whole has never faced before. Dr. Charles Derber, professor of sociology at Boston College, will join Dr. Richard Nolthenius and me to discuss his new book, Dying for Capitalism, How Big Money Fuels Extinction and What We Can Do About It. Noam Chomsky said of Dr. Derber's book that it is an eloquent call for the abolition of fossil fuels and militarism. Very soon, Dying for Capitalism is carefully reasoned and informed, spelling out what we can and must do without delay. Join me and co-hosting again Dr. Richard Nolthenius for Dying for Capitalism, How Big Money Fuels Extinction on Be Bold America, Sunday, December 3rd at 5 p.m. As a reminder, Be Bold America is available as a podcast for free on Apple, Google, and Spotify, as well as YouTube and the KSQD website. Please subscribe for free. I want to give a special thank you to Be Bold America's program engineer, Eliza James, and our station's program director, Howard Feldstein, and Dr. Pettis Perry for co-hosting with me again. Thank you, Pettis.
My pleasure, Jill.
You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD Santa Cruz and KSQD Prunedale. Many voices, one station. Listen worldwide online on ksqd.org. Stay tuned for Sunday Dinner. My name is Jill Cody.
Pettis Perry.
And thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start.